Hi, for this section of Wine School, we're going to talk about Bordeaux. Bordeaux is one of the two most important wine regions in France, along with Burgundy, and therefore one of the most important wine regions in the world. Bordeaux and Burgundy are the two places that historically have had the most prized and most expensive wines in the world. We tend to find a whole range of wines in these areas, but they can reach prices over $1,000 per bottle and can be very long-lived, very important wines. Bordeaux produces both red and white wines, but the red wines are a little bit more famous. The red wines are made from Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, Cabernet Franc, Malbec, Petit Verdot, and also Carmenere. Carmenere really doesn't show up that much anymore, but historically it was used. The white wines from Bordeaux tend to be based upon Sauvignon Blanc, Semillon, and Muscadel.
Hold up, Daddy. So how is Bordeaux organized, and what are all these areas in Bordeaux?
And it isn't too complex, but it does require a little bit of explanation. Hopefully that'll help us remember what the wines are like from each area too. Like many of the world's wine regions, Bordeaux is organized around a system of rivers. There are two rivers that flow out of mountains in France, in southern France, one of which is the Dordogne and one of which is the Garonne. These two rivers bring rocky material out of the mountains, and when they flow together, they make a little bend. They turn north, and then they turn west, and they flow out to the sea. When we try to describe the banks of a river, we think about the way that that river flows. So if we're going down the river and out to sea, the bank that is to your right, we call the right bank, and that's the bank that's on the north and east side. And the one to the west and slightly south, we call the left bank. And this is important because these two banks have pretty distinct wine styles. The left bank is generally divided into the Medoc, which is the major section of the left bank, and then Grave, which is just to its south. The Medoc itself is further divided into the Haut-Medoc, and is usually the better quality area, whereas the Bas-Medoc, or just the Medoc, is a little closer to the end of the river and is a little lower quality. Between the two rivers, we have an area called Entre-deux-Mers, and this basically forms the delta between the two rivers. Entre-deux-Mers is a good place to find good value wines, specifically white wines, but also some reds too. As I mentioned before, there are two rivers that flow together out of mountains in southern France. As they form together, they make a little bend, and it is in this bend that they deposit a whole lot of gravel along the left bank of Bordeaux. This gravel serves two purposes. One, it drains really well, so it doesn't hold water, so it stays drier, and therefore a little warmer. Also, the rocks heat up in the daytime, and they hold their heat overnight. So this is another reason why it's a little warmer on the left bank. So it makes it easier to ripen grapes that are harder to ripen, like Cabernet Sauvignon. So we find that it's easier to ripen Cabernet on the left bank than it is on the right bank, because the right bank is a little more clayey. The gravel doesn't accumulate there. There's a little bit of limestone, there's a little bit of sand, but mostly it's a fair bit of clay on the right bank. Also, the weather patterns in the area mean that it's a little more irregular on the right bank. The right bank, however, has more clay, more sand, a little bit of limestone in the soil, so it doesn't stay as warm. It's a little more damp soil. So you need a grape that you can ripen a little bit more easily, like Merlot. So Merlot is the main grape on the right bank. They have a little bit of Cabernet, but mostly it's Merlot and Cabernet Franc, which is also easier to ripen than Cabernet Sauvignon. So this is the main distinction we find in Bordeaux. The left bank wines tend to be driven by Cabernet Sauvignon blended with Merlot, Cabernet Franc, sometimes a little bit of Malbec, sometimes a little bit of Petit Verdot. And on the right bank we have mostly wines driven by Merlot with a little bit of Cabernet Franc, sometimes a little bit of Cabernet Sauvignon. As I mentioned before, the Haut-Medoc tends to be considered the most important section of the left bank. For the most part, we equate wines and chateaus in Bordeaux. So really the ranking has to do with chateaus themselves. And most of these chateaus are, like they sound, big house with vineyards around it. The first ranking happened in 1855, and it mostly just applied to the Haut-Medoc. And it created 5 different tiers or growths. First growth, second growth, third growth, fourth growth, and fifth growth. There are 5 chateaus that are ranked as first growths. Aubryon, which is actually not in the Haut-Medoc, but down in Grave. Chateau Margaux, which is in the village of Margaux. And then 3 different wines that are in the village of Pauillac. Chateau Latour, Chateau Lafite Rothschild, and Chateau Mouton Rothschild. And Mouton Rothschild is the only change to the classification since 1855, when it was bumped up from a second growth to a first growth. So as we head downriver, there are a few important places to look at on the left bank. Grave, which I mentioned before, and it's very nice section called Pessac-Léognan. Then there's Margaux, which is known for wines of great finesse. After that, we have Saint-Julien, and Saint-Julien is known for having a high concentration of very good second growth and third growth wines. After that, we get to Pauillac, and Pauillac is definitely the king, having the highest number of first growth chateaus. Pauillac wines are usually the more expensive ones, usually the more muscular, the more powerful style with a high percentage of Cabernet Sauvignon. Beyond that, we get to Saint-Estèphe, and Saint-Estèphe is usually known for wines of very good quality, but also a little bit of rusticity, slightly rough around the edges.
I enjoy both left and right things. What's the difference between the left and the right banks?
So now let's look at the right bank. There are two villages that are most important on the right bank, Saint-Emilion and Pomerol. Saint-Emilion has a ranking system of its own. It's a little complex, but for the most part, there are some Grand Cru wines, and then there are some ranked wines that are also called Grand Cru Classé. In Pomerol, there is no ranking system, but it's relatively small and there aren't that many producers, and for the most part, it's very high quality. Saint-Emilion and Pomerol are both known for wines driven by Merlot.
What are the whites of Bordeaux like?
They are very good, and we find whites all over Bordeaux. The best of them tend to be on the left bank and tend to be actually from Grave, specifically in Pessac-Léognan. But we do also find very good whites in the Entre-deux-Mers area too. And usually the more classically styled whites are a blend of Sauvignon Blanc, Semillon, and Muscadel. The Sauvignon Blanc tends to add citrus flavors, acidity, brightness to the wine, whereas the Semillon helps round it out and add rich tropical fruit tones. The last thing to talk about for Bordeaux is Sauternes, and Sauternes is easily the greatest dessert wine of France and possibly the greatest dessert wine of all the world. Sauternes is made with the same grapes as the Bordeaux whites, just in a different proportion. So we tend to have a lot more Semillon in the blend, giving more rich, round, tropical fruit tones to the wine. A little bit of Sauvignon Blanc to add to a little acidity, and then Muscadel for floral aromatics. Sauternes happens because of a very particular effect, and that is the presence of what's called botrytis, and botrytis is a type of fungus. Botrytis doesn't hurt the grapes, it just causes them to shrivel up so they become very concentrated. When you ferment the wine, it can only reach a certain amount of alcohol before the yeast die, and then there's all this sugar left over at the end. So that's why we have a sweet wine with a normal alcohol percentage like 12.5%. All right guys, what did you learn today?
So Bordeaux is generally divided into two different areas. There's the left bank and also the right bank. So the left bank leads with Cabernet Sauvignon, and the right bank leads with Merlot. Duh. But hey, don't forget that Bordeaux also has fine white wines and dessert wines. And they both use Sauvignon Blanc, Semillon, and Muscadel, but in different proportions.